Because I was born in England, as many of you know, the English people love cups of tea. And so when I went to Thailand and I found a monk called Ajahn Chah, that's why I became his disciple. And honestly, when Ajahn Chah, he did go to England once for a visit. And when he came back, we asked him, what did he think of England? And he said it was a very nice country. They said, did you learn any English words when you were there? He said, yes, he did. Only one word he learnt while he was in England, and that word was cup of tea. The trouble is, though, being a monk in this position, sometimes you don't get much chance to drink tea. You have to answer questions, sign books, and have your photograph taken during the breaks. So sometimes I think I should take this thermos and take it into the toilet and sit on there, even though I don't need to go to the toilet. It'd be a nice little place where I can sit down and have a quiet cup of tea. I don't mind. Oh, that's good. But anyway, for the meditation, I did give a longer talk beforehand, just to get myself settled in and everyone else settled in. And I was a little tired. I don't know if you saw that when I was giving the guided meditation, simply because that I have been working very hard. I'm getting old. Sorry, I am old. And just that's sometimes what happens. But there's something which I did notice for those of you who have meditated a lot, that sometimes people do get sort of dull when they start meditating. If you do, that's not a bad thing. And for those of you who are out and out Buddhists, and I hope the nun in front of me is a very devoted Buddhist, you may know that story of the Buddha walking with his attendant Ananda, coming across the one monk who was sitting perfectly straight and hardly moving at all, and the Buddha looked at his attendant Ananda and said, I'm worried about that monk. And shortly later he disrobed. And then deep in the forest he saw another monk who was sitting meditation and was nodding. And the Buddha smiled. And he said, I'm not worried about him. And he soon became fully enlightened. And when I first read that story, I thought can't be right. But then after being a meditator, a monk for such a long time, I realized how right that was. With an idea like sleepiness which comes up in meditation, when you first start meditating, it's like your mind doesn't know what to do. It's not being stimulated, it's not being excited. You can't go to sleep if you're watching a football match, but you can go to sleep, when you're meditating, because it's not so exciting. And for some of you, I've already mentioned, you can start doing things like watching the breath. Watching the breathing, for how long? That must be really, really boring. But this is not what happens. That sometimes that when you are peaceful enough, your mindfulness gets very alert. And when it gets alert, you start to see beauty in things you never expected to see beauty in before. I'm now going to tell you a story which I love telling because it wakes everybody up. It's a gross story, but 100% true. I've told it many times. And that was on one retreat which I was taking. I was teaching it at the retreat center which we built over in Perth called Jhana Grove. And of course I was teaching the meditation retreat, but also to inspire others was actually sitting down with them when we did our group meditations. And on that retreat my meditation was going very well, getting nice and deep and very happy and joyful. But then, like everybody else, I had to go to the toilet. when I went to the toilet in that jhana grove, that I did what we call a number two. You all know what number two is? Yeah, okay. If you don't, you can ask 𝑖𝐿𝑛𝑒, because she said yes, she knows, so she'll be able to let you know. But I made a mistake. After doing the number two, I stood up and looked in the toilet bowl. Wow! In all my life, I've never seen such a beautiful number two. Have you ever really looked in the toilet bowl after you've done a number two? It's not just one single shade of brown. It's all the different intensities of brown. The darker brown, which was drier, the more moist brown, and the way that it's all formed together. And that particular day, it was like a sculpture done by Rodin or Michelangelo. And the way that all those colors, the different shades of brown, blended together, it was like a work of art. And then the aroma coming from it. Wow, that was so real. Many times you pass women wearing perfume, and that's so fake. Sometimes you get like deodorants or the smell on soap, and that's just so manufactured. This is real. It spoke of nature, of life itself. And so I was standing in that toilet cubicle going, wow, wow, this is amazing. And I'm not exaggerating that. It was beautiful. And it took me a long time to be able to, many times my finger hovered over the button on the top of that bowl of water to be able to press the water button to flush. Many times I tried that, but I can't do this. I really thought I should take it out of the bowl and put it in a case and send it to the museum. But it's only because I trained as a monk over many years. I knew how to renounce and let go. Then finally I pressed that button and it went out of my life forever. Oh yes, I'm glad someone appreciates the pain and suffering it was for me. But the interesting part of that was just how beautiful that looked. And that wasn't made up. What happens when you start to get into some meditation practice, your five senses get enhanced. And whatever you see is more beautiful than you've ever seen before. Sometimes it's kind of shocking. Who would have thought that you could be in the toilet and look in the bowl and just get so blissed out, at a piece of feces? And this is sometimes what happens when you meditate. The very first time this happened to me, I was still a student. And when I was a student, we did a 9-day retreat in Cambridge. And we were allowed to go for a walk every morning for 1 hour. And the rest of the time we had to be either in our rooms meditating or in the hall meditating or having interviews. It was quite a strict retreat. But when I went on that walk, sometimes these things are amazing. When something important happens to you in your life, not only do your senses become enhanced, but your memory can never forget these things. This retreat was in Bateman Street in Cambridge, and at the end of Bateman Street, it's the only time I've ever stayed there, at the end of the Bateman Street there was the Cambridge Botanical Gardens. And so when I was allowed to go for a walk for 1 hour, I decided to go for a walk in the Botanical Gardens. Why not? Obvious thing to do. The problem was that when I went into it was a back entrance of the botanical gardens. When I got into the back entrance, the first tree or shrub which I saw was a clump of bamboo. And that was the most beautiful clump of bamboo I'd ever seen in my life. I was really so surprised to see something like that in the Cambridge Botanical Gardens. I think you should all know, you just go into museums of ancient art and you can see many watercolors, Chinese watercolors. They always have bamboo in those old paintings. The reason is because they are inherently beautiful. Their shape and the way they bend so softly under their own weight. And their colors, they're not bright colors, but they're very soft, beautiful colors, the way they mold from the yellows into the greens and the greens back into the yellows. They're gorgeous. And I saw one of those clumps of bamboo in the Cambridge Botanical Gardens. And I was awestruck, I mean literally just standing there with my mouth open for a couple of minutes. But I did have the presence of mind to realize if I didn't sit down or do something, someone would see me, this young student. I was hairy at the time. I had what in those days was known as a donut look. I had big bushy hair all the way to here, and when the hair stopped, that's when the beard started. That's why it's called a donut. In the middle you could see my face. It was very good to keep warm in the cold climate. But anyway, at that particular time I realized that many students were on drugs. And I never took drugs. I was very, very fortunate. But if they see a student, a hairy student, standing, mouth open, gawking at a clump of bamboo, they would soon call the ambulance and take me away to the hospital, thinking I was crazy. But instead, I sat down on a bench close by and still carried on gawking, admiring the most beautiful clump of bamboo I'd ever seen in my life. And when the time was up, I tore myself away to go to have breakfast. I returned the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. For 8 of the 9 days, I went to the same place to admire the beauty in this clump of bamboo. It was fantastic. When the retreat ended, we went back to studies, social life, being busy. But I recall one afternoon I had some free time, and I got on my bicycle, which the students used to use in those days, and cycled to the Cambridge Botanical Gardens, went in there, the back entrance, to see my beautiful clump of bamboo again. And what I saw shocked me. It was the most dry, miserable, leafless clump of bamboo you could ever imagine. This was in Cambridge in UK. It's a very cold place in the world. It's not the sort of environment which bamboo can do well in. And this poor clump of bamboo was not doing well at all. But what shocked me was when I saw it during a meditation retreat, it looked incredibly beautiful. And I could not take my eyes off it day after day. But now I wasn't meditating, I was socializing and studying. The bamboo had lost its beauty. And I realized that beauty which I saw had nothing to do with the bamboo. The beauty you saw in that toilet bowl had nothing to do with the feces. It had everything to do with the mind. When your mind becomes so peaceful, the energies start to get stronger. What you see much more of. You pick up more of, and you start to see so much more beauty. That is one of the byproducts of meditation. It's one of the reasons why when people do meditate a lot, they start to feel joyful and happy. That's where the smile came from when I did the afternoon examinations in my finals. That's why I can even keep smiling now. The joy which you see is something which you would never expect to see. It's why when I started teaching in prisons, when I saw those criminals inside the jails who'd done some terrible things, honestly, I couldn't see them as bad people. I only saw them as people who did bad things. And I told this story, I think, a couple of nights ago in Kuala Lumpur, the last day or two of the retreat. On one of the retreats which I organized over in Perth, in our Ajahn Brahm Centre, because, basically I built that centre, I'm in charge of it. It's nice, I can do whatever I like there. And one of the weird things which I did, that we needed a cook for the retreat, so I got a special cook. He was an amazing cook. His name was Carl, and when he cooked, his food was absolutely delicious, and it's so amazing how hard he worked. And everybody so admired him. He'd be there early, cooking all sorts of things. But what I really admired, he would cook pizzas. He would make the dough himself early in the morning, all the toppings and everything, bake it himself. It really was fresh, made that very day. I've never seen that before. He worked so hard, and at the end of the retreat, when everybody was doing their acknowledgements of thank you for this person, thank you for that person, he wasn't there. He'd already left. And they asked me, "Where's Carl, our amazing cook? We just wanted to thank him." And then I told everybody, he's now back in jail. And I mentioned to everybody, he's in jail for rape. You've been served by a person who you would call a rapist. And you've felt so much joy and happiness getting to know him, and also enjoying his delicious food. And that shocked them. Ajahn Brahm, you've allowed a person who's been convicted of rape to come and cook for us on this retreat. I said, yes. I've known him, I've taught him meditation in jail. He has my trust. He did those terrible things as a young man under drugs. He's now given up those drugs a long time ago. I wanted, number one, to give him a chance to do something very beautiful, to do some good karma, and also to give you an understanding. A person does a bad thing, but doesn't make them a bad person. There's more of what they've done in their life. Every time I've been visiting jail, I've never seen a criminal. I've seen a person who's done crimes. I've never seen a thief. I've seen a person who's stolen. I think you can understand what I mean. I remember that story was so powerful. I'm going off subject now. It's supposed to be about meditation, but this was when I came over here to Singapore many years ago to give a presentation at a conference held in Woodlands in the Department of Mental Health over there. And that's the sort of thing I said there. And after I had given my speech, one of the faculty members asked me, "Can you please come and bless the ward which I look after in this big faculty facility?" And I asked, "What ward is it?" And it's the ward for schizophrenia. And I looked at his chest. He had a big Christian crucifix on his chest. And I said, "Do you really want me to bless your ward?" I'm a Buddhist, you must be a Christian. And he said, yes, I'm a very devout Christian. But what you said made so much sense. I want you to come and bless my ward. He was a professor, the leader of this unit dealing with schizophrenia in Singapore. And I couldn't resist but saying, well, how do you treat schizophrenia in Singapore? And he gave this wonderful answer, which I will never forget. He said, just like you said in your talk, I don't treat schizophrenia in my unit. I treat the other half of the patient, which is not schizophrenic. And I knew what he meant, and I was so impressed. I put my hands up to pay respect to him. As a Buddhist monk, we're not supposed to do that. But that was such an impressive thing he said that I couldn't help myself. This is how I would treat schizophrenia. As a person who has these episodes of schizophrenia, that does not make them, in my book, a schizophrenic. There's another part to them. And this doctor, this professor, was treating the other half of them. Again, I had to ask, what's the result? And he said, far, far better than any other conventional treatment. And I agree. I mentioned in Hong Kong that there was a young man who was a schizophrenic, clinical schizophrenic, according to the usual definitions, who wanted to come and learn meditation at Bodhinyana Monastery. And I was very reticent. Can we do that? Can we look after you? But there's also something inside of me which also says, give them a chance. See how they can do this. So we did. He was excellent. I remember him coming up to me one day and saying, I think in his words, if I remember it correctly, he said, I'm losing it. I need to adjust my medication. I need to go to the hospital for a few days. And he said that with such honesty and such awareness of his condition. It impressed me. So he went into the hospital, adjusted the level of the medication, and then when he came back again, he was a fine meditator. He became an 8 preceptor, someone who wanted to eventually become a novice monk. He became a novice monk. I did the ordination for him. He became a full monk, and he's now an elder monk. And he's one of these, sometimes I think to myself, what have I done in my life? Just giving an ordination to someone who was told he had schizophrenia, and giving him a chance. And he lived up to that chance so beautifully. Many of you who have visited Perth would have seen him. I'm not going to say his name. You would not be able to pick him out. Which one is a schizophrenic? Which one is not? A wonderful monk. I was encouraged by that Catholic professor of schizophrenia here in Singapore. It can be done if you focus on the other part of the person, not the schizophrenia itself. You're more than that. And that's one of the reasons why that when a person does get some wisdom, you can help so many more people. You can deal with problems in a ways which other people just think is impossible. And the benefits of that are huge. And so these are ways where we can use the meditation to gain amazing understandings about this thing which we call the mind. Unfortunately, and I say this as a Westerner, in the West we somehow just become too materialistic, and I don't mean that in the sense of possessions and measuring people by how much they own. Materialism is also a philosophical term to describe a person who believes in a world only of the five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling and tasting and touch. And they've ignored the separate sense of self. Well, I got that wrong. The separate sense of mind. Even I remember reading Greek philosophy as a young man. And if anybody ever reads Plato's Republic, who's saying that even Aristotle believed and taught in the six senses: the sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and mind. And he always called mind the common sense, because the mind knows what you saw, knows what you heard, smelled, tasted, touched, and the mind also knows what you just knew. It's common to all the senses. And so I often, from hearing that it was known as the common sense, sometimes wondered about Western philosophy, Western science and Western medicine, which came from that Western philosophy. How is it that in the West we've lost our mind and lost our common sense? Which is very true. You know that sometimes in my life as a monk, I've seen some weird stuff. One of those weird stuff which I saw, which is appropriate to a talk in Singapore. As long as I was a monk in Thailand, I never knew of any monk who got bitten by a snake in the monastery where I stayed, which was Wat Ba Nana Chat. But then, apparently, it was just the year after I left Wat Ba Nana Chat, a Singaporean man who'd ordained as a monk in the Theravada tradition. The Singaporean monk came into the library one hot afternoon and asked to see the snake book, which detailed all the different species of snake and how dangerous they were in that part of Thailand. And he was looking through the book and suddenly said, "Oh no." He saw a picture of the snake that just bit him about 20 minutes ago. And the monk who was with him also got really concerned and had a look at that part of the leg where the snake bite was on. And when he had a look at it, he saw the 2 puncture wounds of the fangs, and the wound area was red and inflamed. It was an emergency. So the monk ran into the village, which you're allowed to do. You're not supposed to run, except in emergencies. Ran into the village to get the doctor. But the doctor that was brought back was not an ordinary doctor. The doctor they brought back was one of the villagers, what you would call these days the witch doctor. And this doctor had a look at the wound, started chewing some herbs in his mouth, did a chant, what they call a gatha, and started spitting this chewed up herbs with his saliva onto the wound and rubbing it in. This Singaporean man was highly educated. And he looked at the other monks and in true Singapore style asked, "Can I have a proper doctor, please?" And you really could feel for that poor man. You know, he'd actually been bitten by a snake, and a venomous one, and the wound was getting worse and worse. He didn't want to try any hocus pocus. He wanted a real doctor. This is life and death, real life and death. You could see the wound there. But as this villager was doing his chanting, chewing more herbs and spitting them on the area, the monks were astounded. They saw the swelling go down and the 2 puncture wounds close up. And his leg was as if it had never been bitten at all. After half an hour, he was totally back to normal. And they said that was amazing. I had never seen that before myself, but I had heard the villagers talking about it. They were so convinced of this that they had thrown away all of their anti-serums, which the government had given to them in case of snake bite, and they preferred just this ancient, spooky, supernatural stuff which actually worked with less bad side effects. There's too much in this world which sometimes we ignore or we deny, when we deny the power of a thing called the mind. And that's one of the reasons why that when we do our meditation, you are strengthening your own mind, and you are seeing the power it has to heal, to gain insight, wisdom, to understand much deeper than you ever understood before. And especially with health, too often I've seen sicknesses which shouldn't really be there. Too often I mentioned already about cancers disappearing. Maybe that could be something else. But I also remember one of the stories I like telling in the middle of an afternoon like this, when people start to get a bit tired. I remember just one of my own illnesses which I had, and that illness was food poisoning. Now, food poisoning is quite, well, it's not sort of common, but it does happen to monks. And the reason is because you offer us food, and sometimes I don't know what's in it. Even today, when you took me to the buffet in a posh hotel, I had a look, I'll have some of that, but then I left and you gave me other stuff as well. I didn't know what I was eating. It was okay this time, so no problem. But it's always a danger, because sometimes you can put something in your mouth which you're allergic to, or something which wasn't cleaned properly. I don't know. But anyway, on this occasion after lunch, I got food poisoning. Has anyone here ever had food poisoning? Put your hand up. Yeah. Wow, a lot of you. Goodness gracious. But my food poisoning was quite extreme pain. I went back to the cave in which I live in Perth. There's 2 big doors there, so I was already closed both of them. And I do that so I don't get disturbed by any monks or nuns or visitors or anybody outside. It's my place of retreat. And it's true, you can't hear anybody outside. But the danger is that no one outside could hear me inside. Ah! Ah! Because when your tummy's contracting, it's automatic. You were screaming. Ah! But what can you do? The obvious thing which many of you might do is just to open the door and crawl to the nearest phone. But we're in the forest monasteries. It takes ambulances about half an hour to get there. We're secluded. And so I thought, no, I'm not going to wait for half an hour for something to happen. So instead, you did your meditation. And what that meant was you were sitting there in your hut, or maybe just leaning against the wall. You didn't have the strength to sit. And every time there was a cramp in your stomach, every time that happened, you were aware of it and kind to it. Kindfulness. Which meant it hurt a little bit less every time. You were relaxing it. It was only a tiny bit less, but enough to give you encouragement that something was working. And after half an hour, I think that was when the last cramp came. Very soft, very weak. And afterwards there was no more cramping in my tummy. Real food poisoning, but you dealt with it with your meditation. And it just took half an hour before the ambulance would have probably come. And there was no side effects at all. My stomach was fine afterwards. And as I usually explain to people, I wondered what was happening there. Those were real bacteria or viruses, I don't know what. Where did they go? How come they weren't causing me pain anymore? And so I did my imagination. As a scientist, you'd seen bacteria or viruses, either photos of them or see them in a microscope. And I imagined each one of those millions of bacteria causing me problems. Imagine like little blobs, like jelly-like blobs with little tentacles coming out from them. That's just how I visualized them. Blobs of jelly with tentacles, like jellyfish, only tiny. And I imagine each one of those bacteria had all their tentacles crossed in full lotus and were all meditating in my intestines and causing me no more trouble. They had to go somewhere. Where did they go? They couldn't just disappear. I thought they were just meditating and behaving, which is why the food poisoning left. And seen such things too many times to deny, as a scientist, that these things happen and work. So as you are practicing meditation, you get deeper, you start to explore the power of the thing we call the mind, and just how powerful it is. It's been a while since I've been visiting Hong Kong. So they're trying to get me back as soon as possible now the COVID restrictions have lessened. But I remember a few times going into the Chinese university in Hong Kong because they had trouble with suicides. Many students killing themselves. So what can you do? They got some of the best psychology advice. But one of the things which a monk can do, or a nun can do, is to go there and change the energy of that place to make it more positive, more friendly, more accepting. So that's one of the things I did. Yeah, I gave a few talks, but more than that, to sit there, meditate, and create beautiful joy and happiness. Telling a few jokes as well, like I tend to do, in order to raise the spirits of people, of students there. And of course, these things work. He got sort of a response from the Vice-Chancellor, "Thank you for coming." The number of suicides has gone down dramatically. These things actually work. So when you see that they do, why? The power of this thing which you call the mind is great. Over in Cambridge University, when I was a student there was one of these experiments which I remembered seeing, which really challenged me. But I took it on board, and it's one of the reasons why I teach like this. It was an experiment done as part of the Cambridge University Psychic Research Society, of which I was a member. And I say at the same time that one of my close friends, Professor Bernard Carr, he was also a member of this society. He's now the president of the London Society of Psychic Research. And he's also one of the close, he used to be one of the close co-workers of Professor Stephen Hawkins. So much so that he was featured in the movie about Stephen Hawkins and got to walk on the red carpet when they opened that movie on Leicester Square. He's just a scientist, but because of his association with a very famous physicist, he got in that movie and got to walk on red carpet. But he's also one of the people who was part of this Psychic Research Society. One of the things we saw there when we were students, they had a hypnotist come and give a demonstration on the power of hypnotism. Tried many students and found one student who was very easy to hypnotize deeply. And then the hypnotist had a stick with a 4-inch nail protruding from it. And he hypnotized this student to believe that that nail was red hot. And he touched that nail on the student's skin. And the student screamed in pain. At the time, I could accept that. But what I could never understand was why, at the place where that nail touched his skin, a blister came up. A real burn mark happened, even though that nail was at room temperature. How can you create a burn on a person's skin with a nail that's only at room temperature? By making them believe that it's going to burn, using the power of the mind. And of course I thought it was a very cruel experiment, but then I started to wonder afterwards, when a person has a tumor, why is it I've seen so many times those tumors disappear? If you can create a blister, why can't you uncreate a tumor or any other problem in your brain? I wish I could remember this person's name, but there was a guy who came to see me in Penang twice. The first time was because he had just had a very painful operation here in Singapore to do something with his brain, a disease which only about 4 or 5 people in the world had. And the experts in dealing with this were in Singapore. And they gave him this painful operation to cure that brain, whatever it was, damage. And he only did it because he was about to get married, and he thought he needed to do this as an expression of commitment to his wife-to-be. And he came to see me afterwards, and just because he was an extremely rare patient, this condition, this disease, came back, hit him a second time. He knew exactly what he would face. Very, very painful, difficult, expensive operation. But by this time, his wife was pregnant. And he said to me, "How can you not do this operation? Because I'm soon to be a father. I don't want to have my wife go through a trauma of a funeral at the time when she's looking forward to having the first child in our family." So he came up and said, "Look, should I go with this operation again?" I said, "Yes, you have to, but do some meditation as well." And I taught him the meditation which I'm teaching you. kindfulness, to develop strong mind, and then focus it on that part of your brain which was sick or wrong, and see what happens. And he did that. He never expected what would happen next. When he went back to Singapore for the operation, the second operation, they did a CT scan of his brain. They did all of the instruments on him and just set himself up for this brain surgery. And then suddenly they said to him, we need to do the CT scan again. There's some mistake. They did the CT scan a second time, and they came back and said, you do not need the operation. We don't know what's happened, but your brain is now back to normal again. And he came up to see me in Penang to say thank you. And there's those real thank yous. You know, you're saving a person's life and stopping him going through very difficult medical procedures. But mostly, just the inspiration that these things which I teach you actually do work. Which is what, not all the time, but sometimes they do. When they do, they're incredible. So, the power of meditation. Number 2, how can you actually do that? How can you let go? Am I going on? Yeah. Oops. Talk on meditation at 14:15. Okay, I'm about right. How do you actually let go? One of the ways you let go, this comes from a story when we did used to go into prisons to teach meditation. I've got to be honest with you, the first time I went into a prison to teach meditation, there were so many prisoners interested in learning meditation. You know why? Because one of the prisoners, one of the leaders in the prison gangs, he interrupted me after 5 minutes of talking about meditation, said, "Can I ask a question?" And he was so big and so scarred and so obviously tough. As a monk, I said, "Yes, what do you want to ask?" I was really concerned because, they could beat you up so easily. And he said, "Is it true that through meditation you can learn how to fly over walls?" That's why the prisoners wanted to learn meditation. They wanted to know how to levitate. And when I told them, honestly, that it can be done, but it takes very skillful meditators over many, many years, the next time I taught meditation, a week afterwards, only 3 people turned up. But I carried on teaching over there. But anyhow, just, when you teach in places like prisons, you learn so much. You learn about kindness, and you learn about how people get sick, and you learn why it is that so many people in prison, when they're released, go back again. They don't feel their worth staying outside. The sense of worth is just so low. But anyway, in one of these prisons, the monks are so kind that after teaching the meditation, they invited one of my monks, "Can you please stay a little bit longer? We've arranged some tea and some cheese and coffee, whatever you want. We know what you can enjoy now. Can you stay a bit longer? We'd like just have a chat." And so he said yes. And so they wanted to know, what is it like in an Australian monastery? So he started to tell them, in Australian monastery, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 4 a.m. And just at that, they stopped him. "What? At 4 a.m.? Even in prison you don't have to get up till 7. What crime did you do to have to get up so early?" And then asked, at 4 o'clock in the morning, what do you do then? Can you turn on the television and watch the midnight movie or something? No, we don't have TVs in forest monasteries. We sit down and meditate. Oh, okay. But do you have a breakfast? In those days, we did have breakfast because we used to work very hard building. But the breakfast would be in a cup like this with 3 Weetabix, some milk, and a cup of tea, and that was it. Wow, they say. In prison, you can have pancakes, you can have noodles, you have bacon and eggs, whatever eggs you like, whether it's fried eggs, scrambled eggs, boiled eggs, poached eggs, eggs Benedict, whatever you want you can have. And that's all you get, you got no choice. Yeah, we're monks, no choice. Wow. Then what do you do after breakfast? Can you just go and play sport? Have a game of soccer or tennis to keep fit? No, we don't play sport as Buddhist monks. I think I mentioned this yesterday. I was actually over in Malaysia. I did think of starting a football team in Bodhinyana Monastery so we could challenge the Christian church just for friendship, to try and break down the barriers which separate us. But then I started thinking, just imagine that we did start a Buddhist football team and that we challenged the Catholics to a game. What would happen? We'd have to play by Buddhist principles. We would never tackle anybody. If they try to tackle us, let go. Don't be attached to the ball. And if the other team were losing, we couldn't score goals. That would be just not compassionate, harming other beings. We would score own goals if it would make the other people more happy. You soon discover that a Buddhist football team would not work. Which is one of the reasons why I've never seen Singapore football team ever in the World Cup. Too many Buddhists. Thailand, they're not in the World Cup. Burma? No. But anyhow, so no, in the morning we usually do some work, and sometimes really heavy work. And when they described the work we were doing, they said they will never get us to do that in prison. No way. What about lunch? And I see what the lunch we have here is one way, but over in Monastery we eat out of our bowl. So many times the food gets mixed up. Honestly, one time I had spaghetti bolognese with strawberry ice cream on top. Have you ever had that? How do you know what it tastes like? You're just assuming, aren't you? You're right, it was disgusting. But it all went in one bowl and it all mixed up. So the prisoners were really disgusted at us. Apparently, even in solitary confinement, they give you a tray with different compartments. I said, well, what do you do after lunch? Can you play like cards or Monopoly or something? I said, no, meditation. What about dinner? What do you have for dinner? I think you all know that monks don't have anything to eat in the afternoon, evening, or night time. We have nothing. Wow, said the prisoners. That is really tough. So what do you do in the evening? Can you play a game of cards, poker or something? No, we just meditate. What time do you go to bed? Bed, you said? We sleep on the floor. And these prisoners were just so surprised that even in top security prisons in Australia, a monastery is far more tough, far more ascetic. And they were concerned. Their friend, who got to know, was living in such a tough environment. What they said next, I could never make up. This is what they said. They said, that's terrible in your monastery, that's Bodhinyana Monastery. Why don't you come in here and stay with us instead? He had a point. What's the difference between a monastery and a prison? The main difference, and the reason why I tell this story, in a monastery, the people want to be there. In a prison, they don't want to be there. Doesn't matter how comfortable it is, how much food they have, how they can watch the TV, how they can play games of sport or whatever. If you don't want to be there, it is a prison. And that opened up this wonderful avenue of Dhamma, of truth, of teachings. Where you work, do you like going to work on a Monday morning? Yay, whoopee! Work day today. If you don't, your workplace is like a prison for you. If you're in a relationship you don't like, your partner's giving you a hard time, it's really difficult and stressful, then your relationship is like a prison. You've been sentenced to 20, 30 years of marriage. If you are in a body which is falling apart and being very painful, then your body is like a prison. If you're listening to a talk and you're thinking, when is Ajahn Brahm going to finish? Then this talk is like being in prison. So how do you escape from the many prisons of life? Places where you don't want to be. If you're having to go to work and you think, I don't want to go to work today, you made a prison of work. Instead, if you go to work and say, I'm happy to be here, I'm doing a service for somebody, I'm making money so I can look after my poor old mum. If you are doing a service and you're happy to be here, then you feel free. If you're in a relationship, it may not be the best, but it's good enough, and you're happy to be in that relationship, then you feel free. Your body may be sick, but all bodies get sick sometimes. I'm going to learn from this. Then you're free. Anytime you change your attitude and want to be here, then you are free. So if to let go, no matter what you're experiencing in this moment, it may be unpleasant, it may be painful, it may be disappointing. You can always get something from it, learn from it, grow from it. If you're happy to be here, then it doesn't hurt. When I say you can always get something from it, you know what I've taught so many times. If you tread in the dog poo, always take it home. Think how lucky you are, because the dog poo is the fertilizer for your wisdom and compassion. So every time you have a disappointment, a pain, please always, yay, more dog poo for my life. In other words, more fertilizer for your compassion and your wisdom. If you're happy to be here, you feel so free. That's how we let go. We're sitting here and you're falling fast asleep. Be happy to be here. Then you are free. The sleepiness soon disappears by itself because of your happiness, contentment. And then you find you're very peaceful. You're like a monk. It may be a harder place to live, but you're so happy to be here, you enjoy it to the max. Okay. So, that was the 3:15 p.m. talk to the 4:15 p.m. meditation, extended by 10 minutes, because I know how in Singapore you always like to keep on time. I always remember that when I have to go on Singapore Airlines. And they say, you got to turn up in time or whatever. But anyway, this is not Singapore Airlines. This is Buddhist Fellowship. So, we're going to have a break now for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. But is there any question anybody would like to ask about what I just said right now? Yeah, you got a question, yeah, okay.
Dear Ajahn Brahm, I'd like to ask a question related to meditation and wisdom. I understand that when our mind reaches a level of meditated state, it will lead to calmness and clarity where wisdom arises, just like a cup of distilled water that reflects the object as it is. However, why many Zen masters do not encourage meditators to get indulged in long meditation, like for months or years, as they may experience peace but not necessarily wisdom.
I find that if anybody just
Many Zen temples practitioners have scheduled timing for meditation for 1 to 2 hours per session and then come back to daily activities. This can give rise to wisdom. So can you please explain how wisdom arises and what is the correct practice to meditate that gives rise to both peace and wisdom? Thank you.
Okay, easy. How long did the Buddha meditate under the Bodhi tree?
6 years.
I think he started in the morning after getting a nice, delicious meal from Sujata, and he meditated all afternoon and all night. If he'd have chosen a Zen monastery to meditate in, he would have never got enlightened. So the amount of time you meditate, it's not a case of trying to get your PB, your personal best. But there are some times you get so still when you're meditating that the whole concept of time vanishes. The first time you do a very deep meditation for many hours, it's kind of weird. You're fully aware, incredibly aware, more aware than usual. And what is normally the meditation object is the different bliss states. You're having a wonderful time. But also, as you start coming out of that meditation and you realize you've been meditating for hours, the first time that happens to you, you think, oh my goodness, this is going to hurt. After an hour and a half, your body is stiff. After 4 hours, oh my goodness. But the weird thing is, after deep meditations, the longer you sit, the less pain you feel. In fact, it surprises you the first time. You got huge amounts of energy, no pain at all. And you feel like you could run an Olympic Games marathon. So this is what happens when you become really still. In one retreat, which was conducted in Sydney a few years ago, it was run by a Theravada Vietnamese monk. And this Theravadan Vietnamese monk, he was supposed to give the introductory talk at 7:30, and then lead a meditation, and then afterwards people would meditate if they wanted to or go to bed and carry on the next day. This monk, he never gave the introductory talk. When he sat down to meditate, he just carried on meditating. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, he hadn't come out of his meditation to give the evening talk. He was just still sitting there. So all the people on the retreat, they went to bed. When they got up in the morning, this monk was still sitting there, hadn't moved. So they just carried on. They went to breakfast. The monk never went to breakfast. He just carried on sitting there like the Buddha statue for 8 days. For 8 days he never drank any water, ate any food, went to the toilet, didn't do any of that, just sat there perfectly still. After 8 days, when he came out of his meditation, the first thing he said, "I apologize. I went into a very deep meditation, time disappeared for me. Had a wonderful time." But he realized he'd neglected his duty to teach. And apparently all the people who witnessed that, they said, "No, thank you so much. We didn't realize such meditation was still possible, in this age. You could sit there and let go so much that even time vanishes for you. And you can sit down so peacefully, so quietly, for 8 days, not moving, not eating, not doing anything, and be so healthy and happy afterwards." And that happened in Sydney, in Aussie. It can happen. Should we do that now and I just go into meditation for 8 days? No. Okay. So was another question or just one? Okay. So now the second question which some people were thinking of, can we go to the toilet now? They're already going anyway. So yes, let's have a break for 5 or 10 minutes, okay?
Yes. Thank you,
Okay.
Ajahn.